The coffee hit his Italian suit at exactly 8:47 a.m., 3 minutes before the most important investor meeting of his career, and the woman holding the empty cup looked at him like she'd just drowned a puppy. Dominic Reed didn't lose control. Not of his billion-dollar tech empire, not of his meticulously scheduled days, and certainly not of his emotions. But standing in the marble lobby of Reed Innovations with espresso soaking through his shirt, he felt something crack in his chest, a sharp, unfamiliar heat that had nothing to do with the coffee's temperature. "I am so sorry," the woman stammered, her hands fluttering uselessly between them. She had wild auburn hair that refused to stay in its clip, freckles scattered across flushed cheeks, and eyes the color of honey catching light. "I turned around and you were just there and I didn't see you, and oh God, is that Armani?" "Brioni," Dominic corrected coldly, his jaw tight. Around them, employees froze mid-stride, watching the disaster unfold. No one spoke to Dominic Reed like this, breathless and panicked and utterly without the polished deference he'd come to expect. "And you are Isla Monroe, receptionist. First day." Each word came out like a separate sentence, her voice climbing higher. "I was bringing you coffee." Clearly, I failed spectacularly at that. Something twisted in his chest at the way her voice broke on that last word. She looked absolutely mortified, her whole body trembling slightly, and for a fraction of a second, Dominic saw past his ruined suit to the terror in her eyes. This job probably mattered to her. This moment probably felt like the end of her world. "Good," the harsh voice in his head whispered. "Let her learn. This is what failure costs." But another part of him, a part he'd buried under years of calculated distance, noticed how she hadn't looked away. Even terrified, even drowning in embarrassment, she held his gaze. There was something raw about her, something unflinchingly real in a building full of people who'd learned to wear masks around him. "Security will escort you out," he heard himself say, each word precise and cutting. "HR will process your termination." Her face went pale, but she didn't cry. She just nodded once, sharp and quick, then bent to pick up the fallen cup with shaking hands. "I understand. I'm sorry for wasting your time, Mr. Reed." She turned to leave, her shoulders drawn tight, and Dominic felt something strange unfurl in his chest, regret, maybe, or curiosity, or some unnamed thing that made him want to call her back. But he had a meeting in 3 minutes and a reputation to maintain, so he let her walk away, tracking the defeated slope of her spine until she disappeared around the corner. He made it 5 steps toward the elevator before he stopped. Her voice had cracked on his name. "Not sir, not boss, Mr. Reed," spoken with a softness that felt oddly intimate despite the formality. And she'd said sorry like she meant it, not the empty corporate apology he was used to, but genuine remorse that had weight to it. When had someone last apologized to him and meant it? Dominic ran a hand through his dark hair, coffee still dripping from his collar, and felt the careful architecture of his morning crumbling. The meeting could wait 5 minutes. Logan, his VP, could stall. But this woman, this clumsy, genuine, unpolished woman. "Belay that order," he called to the security guard halfway across the lobby. His voice carried the absolute authority of someone used to being obeyed without question. "Ms. Monroe stays." Across the building, in the sterile bathroom where she'd fled, Isla Monroe pressed her forehead against the cold mirror and tried to remember how to breathe. One job. She'd had this job for 47 minutes, and she'd already destroyed it by baptizing the CEO in Arabica. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her head, warm and worried. "Baby girl, sometimes the universe puts us exactly where we need to be, even when it looks like disaster." This didn't feel like destiny. This felt like cosmic punishment for every time she daydreamed her way through life instead of paying attention. But she hadn't apologized for being herself, clumsy and scattered and perpetually 3 steps behind the world's pace. She'd apologized for the coffee, for the disruption, for failing at the simple task of walking and holding liquid simultaneously. That felt important somehow, even as her career dissolved before it began. Isla studied her reflection, mascara slightly smudged, hair escaping in rebellious waves, blouse wrinkled from her nervous twisting. She looked exactly like what she was, a small-town girl who'd stumbled into a world of glass towers and designer suits, hoping she could fake belonging long enough to actually earn it. Her phone buzzed. A text from her best friend Zoe. "First day." How's it going? Isla typed back, I assaulted the CEO with espresso. Currently hiding in bathroom. Send prayers or bail money. Before she could spiral further, someone knocked on the bathroom door. A woman's voice, crisp and professional. Ms. Monroe? Mr. Reed has requested your presence in his office immediately. Her stomach dropped. This was it, the formal firing, probably with witnesses and paperwork and security watching to make sure she didn't steal any pens on her way out. But Isla Monroe had never been good at giving up, even when giving up was the logical choice. So she straightened her shoulders, fixed her hair as best she could, and walked toward whatever ending, or beginning, waited for her on the 40th floor. What she didn't know couldn't know, was that Dominic Reed stood by his floor-to-ceiling windows, coffee-stained suit abandoned for a fresh one, staring at her employee photo on his screen. In it, she was smiling, bright and unself-conscious and utterly without guile. It was the kind of smile he hadn't seen in years, certainly not in this building where everyone had learned to calculate their expressions for maximum advantage. He'd built his empire on reading people, on seeing through their performances to the calculations underneath. But Isla Monroe's fumbling apology had been guileless, her horror genuine, her retreat instinctive rather than strategic. In a world of careful masks, she'd been catastrophically, disastrously real. And Dominic Reed, who'd sworn off real things years ago, couldn't stop thinking about the way her voice had broken on his name. The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt like ascending to her own execution. Isla watched the numbers climb, 23, 24, 25, each one bringing her closer to whatever cold dismissal waited in Dominic Reed's office. The HR woman beside her, Patricia something, offered no comfort with her pressed lips and tablet clutched like a shield. The doors opened to a different world. Up here, everything was darker, charcoal walls, black leather, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city like a conquest already won. His assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Victoria, barely glanced up before gesturing toward the massive double doors at the hall's end. He's expecting you. Isla's hand trembled as she knocked. Once. Soft. Come in. His voice carried through the wood, low and commanding. She pushed the door open and found him standing by those impossible windows, backlit by morning sun, wearing a fresh suit that probably cost more than her entire year's rent. He didn't turn immediately, just stood there studying the city below like a general surveying his territory. Mr. Reed, I. Close the door. She did, the click of the latch somehow final. When he finally turned, his face was unreadable. Sharp jaw, steel-gray eyes that seemed to catalog everything about her in a single sweep, dark hair perfectly styled despite the earlier chaos. He was beautiful in the way expensive things were beautiful, cold and precise and utterly out of her reach. Sit, he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Isla sat, her hands knotted in her lap. The leather was buttersoft beneath her, probably more comfortable than her entire couch at home. Everything in this office screamed power, control, money, all the things she'd never had and never understood how to navigate. Dominic moved to his desk but didn't sit. He leaned against it instead, arms crossed, studying her with an intensity that made her skin warm. Tell me, he said quietly, why I shouldn't fire you. Her throat went dry. She'd prepared for anger, for coldness, for immediate dismissal. But this request for her to argue for herself, felt crueler somehow. Like being asked to explain why she deserved to exist in his world. I can't give you a good reason, she admitted, the words spilling out before she could polish them. I ruined your suit, embarrassed you in front of your employees, and proved I can't handle the basic task of carrying coffee. If I were you, I'd fire me too. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe. That's your defense. I don't believe in lying to make myself look better. Isla met his eyes, even though every instinct screamed to look away. But I can tell you that I'm good at reading people, that I care about doing things right, and that I've never met a problem I couldn't solve if you gave me enough time and patience. I know I don't fit here. I know I'm not polished or perfect or smooth. But I work harder than anyone you'll ever meet, and I don't give up. The silence stretched between them, taut and strange. His eyes hadn't left hers, and she felt seen in a way that was both terrifying and oddly intimate, like he was reading not just her words but the desperate hope beneath them. "You think you don't fit here," he said finally, his voice softer than before. "Why?" "Because I'm me," she said simply. "I daydream. I talk too much when I'm nervous. I care about things like whether the person on the phone sounds sad, or if someone needs an extra minute even when there's a line. Those things don't matter in places like this. Efficiency matters. Perfection matters. I'm neither of those things." Dominic was quiet for a long moment, something working behind his eyes. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight she didn't understand. "My father built this company on the belief that people are predictable, that if you apply enough pressure, create enough fear, everyone falls in line." He paused, his jaw tightening. He was right. Everyone does fall in line. They perform, they calculate, they show me exactly what they think I want to see. He pushed off the desk, moving closer, and Isla's breath caught. Up close, she could see the faint scar along his jaw, the shadows under his eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights, the barely contained tension in his shoulders. "But you," he continued, stopping just a few feet away, "you didn't perform. You spilled coffee on me and looked genuinely devastated. You apologized like you meant it. You walked away with your dignity instead of begging or making excuses." His eyes searched hers. "When did someone last do something in this building without calculating the angle first?" "I don't know how to calculate angles," Isla whispered. "I just know how to be honest." Something shifted in his expression, a crack in that controlled facade, brief but unmistakable. For just a second, he looked almost vulnerable, like her words had reached some buried part of him he'd forgotten existed. "Everyone who works for me is afraid of me," he said quietly. "They should be. Fear creates efficiency, compliance, results. But it also creates—" He trailed off, seeming to catch himself. "Loneliness." Isla finished softly. His eyes snapped to hers, sharp and suddenly exposed. She'd hit something, some truth he hadn't meant to reveal. The air between them felt charged, dangerous, like standing too close to a lightning storm. "You're not fired," he said abruptly, his voice hardening back to that CEO coldness. "But you're not working reception anymore." Her stomach dropped. "I don't understand." "You'll work directly with me. As my personal assistant." "What?" "No. Mr. Reed, I'm not qualified. Victoria is transferring to the acquisitions team. She's wanted it for months." He moved back to his desk, putting professional distance between them again, but something in his posture remained less rigid than before. "You'll start tomorrow. 7 a.m. sharp. Don't be late, and for God's sake, don't bring coffee." Isla stood on shaky legs, her mind reeling. This didn't make sense. People didn't assault their boss and get promoted. They definitely didn't get promoted to positions they had no business filling. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Dominic looked up from his computer, where he was already back to whatever empire building required his attention. But his eyes held something she couldn't name, something that made her pulse quicken. "Because everyone else in this building has forgotten how to be real," he said simply. "And I find I'm curious what happens when someone remembers." Isla walked to the door in a daze, her hand on the handle when his voice stopped her. "Ms. Monroe." She turned back. "The coffee," he said, the corner of his mouth lifting in something that might have been almost a smile. "It was terrible. Too bitter. No sugar." "I can make better coffee," she promised, and was rewarded with that almost smile deepening into something genuine. "I'm counting on it." She left his office feeling like gravity had shifted, like the world had tilted on its axis, and she was falling in a direction she didn't have a name for. Behind her, Dominic Reed stood alone in his empire of glass and steel, staring at the closed door and wondering what the hell he'd just done. He'd spent years building walls, creating distance, ensuring no one got close enough to matter. And then a clumsy receptionist with honest eyes and unpolished edges had stumbled through his defenses without even trying. For the first time in a decade, Dominic Reed felt something other than empty. It terrified him. 3 weeks later, Isla learned that Dominic Reed took his coffee black at 6:45 a.m., answered emails during lunch because he never actually ate lunch, and had to tell when he was stressed. He'd run his thumb along his jaw, right over that faint scar she'd noticed their first day. She also learned he was lonelier than anyone she'd ever met. It was in the small things. The way his office stayed dark until she arrived to open the blinds. How he never had personal calls, never mentioned friends or family, never left the building before 8 p.m. The way his eyes would linger on her when she laughed at something on her phone, like he was trying to remember what genuine joy looked like. "You're staring again," she said without looking up from the presentation she was formatting. They'd fallen into an easy rhythm, her at the small desk Victoria had vacated in the corner of his office, him at his massive one by the windows. Sometimes hours passed in comfortable silence. "I'm thinking," Dominic corrected, but she heard the almost smile in his voice. That happened more now. Small cracks in his armor. About how you hum when you work. Badly, I might add. Isla looked up, mock offended. "I have an excellent humming voice, thank you very much." "You have enthusiasm. Pitch accuracy remains debatable." He leaned back in his chair, studying her with that intense focus that still made her breath catch. "Why do you do it? Hum while working?" She shrugged, saving her document. "My grandmother used to say that work without joy is just slow dying. So I hum. Keeps the joy in it, even when I'm doing boring things like formatting slides about quarterly projections." Something softened in his expression. "Your grandmother sounds wise." "She was the best person I've ever known," Isla said quietly. "She raised me after my parents died. Taught me that being kind costs nothing and that the world has enough hard edges without us adding more." Dominic was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the city glittered in the dusk, a million lights promising connection and warmth. Inside his office, the silence felt fragile, precious. "I don't know how to do that," he admitted finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Be soft. Be kind without it being strategic." Isla's heart cracked open at the rawness in those words. She stood, crossing to his desk without overthinking it. "May I ask you something personal?" He tensed but nodded. "When did you last let someone take care of you?" The question clearly caught him off guard. His jaw tightened, the thumb moving to his scar in his unconscious tell. "I don't need." "Everyone needs, Mr. Reed." She perched on the edge of his desk, close enough to see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight he carried alone. "Even emperors need someone to remind them they're human." "Dominic," he said suddenly. "What?" "My name. You've worked for me for 3 weeks. I think you've earned the right to use it." His eyes met hers, and the vulnerability there stole her breath. "When I'm alone with you, I'd like to just be Dominic. Not Mr. Reed, not the CEO. Just myself. If I can even remember who that is." Isla felt tears prick her eyes. "I'd like that. And for the record, I think you remember more than you realize. The man who promoted a clumsy receptionist instead of firing her? Who notices when I'm stressed and quietly reschedules meetings to give me time? Who donated $100,000 to the Children's Hospital last week and told no one?" She smiled softly. "That man knows exactly who he is. He's just forgotten he's allowed to be that person." Dominic stared at her like she'd spoken a language he'd forgotten existed. Slowly, carefully, he reached out and caught her hand where it rested on his desk. His fingers were warm, slightly calloused, and trembling almost imperceptibly. "You see too much," he whispered. "Maybe you've just been invisible for too long." They stayed like that, hands linked, the city sprawling below them, two people who shouldn't make sense together but somehow did. Isla felt the moment shift, felt something fragile and new taking root between them. "Tell me something real," she said softly. "Something you've never told anyone." Dominic's thumb traced circles on her palm, an unconscious gesture that sent warmth spiraling through her. "I'm afraid," he admitted, the words clearly costing him, "that this, whatever this is between us, will be like everything else. That you'll see the parts of me that are cold and broken and calculating, and you'll realize you were wrong about who I am." "Dominic." She squeezed his hand. I already see those parts. The difference is, I know they're not all you are. They're armor. Protection. The walls you built to survive. She leaned closer. But walls can come down when you find someone safe to come down for. His eyes searched hers, desperate and hopeful and terrified. What if I don't know how? Then I'll teach you, she promised. One hummed song, one terrible coffee, one honest moment at a time. Something broke in him then. She saw it happen, saw the exact moment his control fractured. He stood abruptly, their hands still linked, bringing them face to face with barely inches between them. Isla. Her name on his lips sounded like a prayer and a question and a plea all at once. I don't do this. I don't let people in. I don't feel, she finished gently. I think you feel everything, Dominic Reed. You just got very good at pretending you don't. His free hand came up slowly, carefully, giving her every chance to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers brushed her cheek with devastating tenderness. You terrify me, he whispered. You walked into my life by accident and turned everything I thought I knew upside down. Good, Isla breathed. You were too controlled anyway. A little chaos looks good on you. His laugh was soft, surprised, real, and it transformed his entire face. For a moment, he wasn't the harsh CEO or the lonely emperor in his tower. He was just a man, scarred and scared and hoping for something he'd stopped believing existed. Have dinner with me, he said suddenly. Not here. Not as boss and assistant. Just as us. Dominic Reed, are you asking me on a date? I'm asking if you'd give me a chance to figure out who I am when I'm with you, he corrected, his thumb still tracing gentle patterns on her cheek. Because for the first time in years, I want to be someone worth knowing. Isla's answer was to lean forward and press a soft kiss to his cheek, right over that scar she'd memorized. I already think you're worth knowing. But yes, dinner sounds perfect. When she pulled back, his eyes were bright with something that looked dangerously close to hope. That night, Dominic Reed left his office at 6 p.m. for the first time in 5 years. He took Isla to a small Italian restaurant where nobody knew his name, and they talked for 3 hours about everything and nothing. Her grandmother's recipes, his childhood dreams before the empire, the way the city looked different when you weren't trying to conquer it. She made him laugh. Real, unguarded laughter that drew stares from other diners. And when he walked her to her door, he didn't kiss her. Instead, he took her hand and said, "Thank you for seeing me." "Thank you for letting me," she whispered back. Weeks turned into months. The harsh CEO softened in increments, a smile here, a joke there, moments of vulnerability that grew more frequent. His employees noticed the change, whispered about it in break rooms and elevators. Some said Ms. Monroe had bewitched him. Others said she'd simply reminded him he was human. Isla knew the truth was simpler and more profound. She just loved him exactly as he was, armor and all, until he felt safe enough to set the armor down. And Dominic Reed, who'd built an empire on control and distance, discovered that the best things in life were the ones you couldn't control, like clumsy receptionists with honest eyes who crashed into your world and refused to let you hide. 6 months after she'd baptized him in coffee, Dominic stood in that same lobby and pulled Isla into his arms in front of everyone. "What are you doing?" she laughed, conscious of the stares. "Something I should have done the day you stumbled into my life," he murmured against her hair. "Choosing you. Publicly, completely, irrevocably choosing the woman who taught me that being soft isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing we can do." "You're going to ruin your reputation as the harsh CEO," she teased, but her voice wavered with emotion. "Good," he said, pulling back to cup her face in his hands. "I'd rather be known as the man who was loved by Isla Monroe. Everything else is just noise." He kissed her then, sweet and certain, in the lobby where they'd first collided. Around them, employees gaped and whispered and smiled. And Isla Monroe, who'd thought she'd destroyed her future on her first day, realized she'd actually found it, in the arms of a man who'd forgotten how to be real until she reminded him. Sometimes the worst first impressions lead to the best love stories. Sometimes chaos is exactly what a controlled life needs. And sometimes, the person who disrupts everything is the person who saves everything too. Have you ever found love in the last place you expected it, maybe even in what felt like a disaster at first? Share your unexpected love story below. I'd love to hear how your beginning became your forever.